remember that Canto 4 ends with another one of these moments when Dante is almost overwhelmed by the light in Beatrice's eyes now that he's here in paradise. He's so dazzled that he actually says he was about to faint. And I think that this is a sign of the question which he wants to ask her, which actually had also been mentioned in Canto 4, which was, look, if you do break a vow in life, as Picardo and Constance had done, can't you compensate for it in some way, perhaps by good works? And I think that this question causes the dazzlement and causes him almost to faint because he knows, I think, in his sort of heart of hearts, that that's just the wrong way of going about it here in paradise. That in these states of awareness, in this reality, it's not about bargaining your way further into heaven. Of course it's not. But he doesn't know quite how it does work yet here in paradise. And so that tension becomes sort of unbearable for him. And he knows that there's more here that he needs to grasp, and yet he just can't quite see what that more is here in this moment. But it's also important that he risks being wrong. He puts his best insight forward. And at the beginning of Canto 5, Beatrice says, look, if you can feel the warmth of love, if you can feel an unearthly glow, if you can begin to see a light which has never really been seen on earth, that's only to be expected. It's only to be expected that the wisdom he's beginning to see more fully is going to require him to shift his consciousness, to be able to become capable not just of extending what he's already known, but seeing something genuinely new. And that's what I think Beatrice in her opening comments is affirming for him now. It's okay to have made that mistake. Um, I think of him as a bit like a child, who has moved on from the stage of saying, no, but what's right or wrong? And sort of wanting to know it in black and white terms, but isn't yet able to find their own way through the greys of life. And so gets confused about, but you said it was right, or is it wrong? I don't understand. He's in that kind of a parallel developmental stage, you might say. But Beatrice also says to him, look, I can see that the eternal light, the divine insight, is kindling within you. In a way, how could it be otherwise? Now they're in these paradisal states. And so she's going to foster the growing of that light within him now in this canto. Then Dante, the poet, uses a trick that he hasn't yet done in the Divine Comedy, and I think this is the only canto in which he does it, because he says to us readers, this is how Beatrice began this canto. And it's a real jolt, breaking the fourth wall in a new way. And what it does is it kind of collapses the differences between Dante the poet, Dante the pilgrim, Beatrice, and us. It's like, for a moment, we're slightly confusedly all in the same state. And of course, it's enacting precisely what Dante is going to be struggling with in this canto. To borrow from an idea that I used in the last canto, it's like he is going to be invited to bring more closely together his divine double with his mortal double in order that he can integrate them and so move further into paradise. And it invites us too to bring together ourselves as readers with Beatrice, who almost stands for our divine aspect, certainly the divine wisdom speaking directly to us in this moment. Can we too draw closer to this eternal light? Can we feel it within ourselves and so become that little bit more integrated, that little bit more whole? It's a very startling moment, and even in the startle, you feel what Dante the Pilgrim is not just recounting, but is inviting us to share in as well. This is at the heart of his effort here in the Divine Comedy. He wants us to change even as he was changed. And Dante then says, this is what Beatrice said. She begins by remarking that freedom of will is the greatest gift that intelligent beings, like human individuals, have been given by God. Now, this understanding of freedom of will is a bit more expansive, I think, than the modern sense, which can often just mean the freedom to choose this or that. This is much more about we have the ability consciously to align ourselves with the divine life or not to do so. And it's in the little moments as well as the big moments in this life that we are or aren't exercising that gift which is given by God, given by our Creator. And so Beatrice continues, this is why vows matter so much, because vows are one key way in which we utilize that gift. They're the decisions which we make, again, sometimes small, sometimes large, sometimes private, sometimes public, by which we decide how we're going to use this life with its tremendous purpose when we're using it well, when we're living to our best. Its tremendous purpose of becoming more and more aligned, more and more transparent, more and more capable, not just of receiving the divine light, but shining with that light ourselves. This expands on it in a couple more ways. She says, look, God gave you this freedom, and because it's freely given as freedom, God will honour however you choose to use that freedom, however you choose to align yourself in this life, whether with God or in other ways. And so that's another reason why it's so serious. She says that it works as a kind of sacrifice. And it's sacrifice meant in quite a particular way, I think. It's receiving something and then offering it back. You know, so sort of as if God says, you know, look, you get shown kindnesses in life, so show kindness to others, or you're able to detect what's good, beautiful, and true in life. So offer what's good, beautiful, and true back to life. That toing and froing what we're given and then offering what we're given back is one of the key ways in which we become more and more aligned with this divine dynamic, which we can discover through this notion of sacrifice. It's not sacrifice in the sense of a sort of blood offering that God somehow requires to cleanse sins. It's sacrifice much more in the sense of what, as Blake puts it, kissing the joy as it flies. It's about connecting with what comes to us in life, but not possessing it, building its energy so it flies even more in life, even as we kiss it, as it passes. It's that continual receiving and letting go which actually enables us to receive more, because then the store of all that you might enjoy is actually in the cosmos itself, is in the divine life itself. It's not something you're trying to keep hold of and control and possess in your own self, which of course would be a rather tiny store compared to what is out there. And a third way that I think this alignment, this vow making, this freedom really matters is because it just is the case that the choices you make in life will be the path that your life takes. How you respond to things as much as how you exercise your own agency. It reminds me of a remark that Nietzsche makes when he says, we become what we are. It's kind of a wisdom and insight that is so obvious as it's almost easy to overlook. But it's the sense that even right now, in the present, who we are being right now is going to shape to some degree who we become in the next moment. And similarly, you know, the way that we live today is going to shape or even determine how we live tomorrow, this week, next week, this year, next year. So the choices which we make, the way we exercise this freedom, is absolutely crucial. There really can be nothing more important. And of course, it's quite the opposite of what the souls in Inferno were doing. They couldn't begin to grasp how their decisions in the moment might matter because they were so preoccupied with what had happened to them during their mortal lives, or indeed what might happen to them into the future. So this, Beatrice explains, to return to Dante's question, is why there's no compensation, as if you can break a vow and then make some sort of sacrifice, do some kind of good works in order to make up for the breakage. Because that would be like living your life but saying, oh, I didn't want to live it in that way. Can I perform some sort of rite that corrects what I've actually done? No, it's precisely what we're doing that's shaping who we are. So we must live in our lives and not expect somehow to be able to live a kind of half life, then do a trade with God so that God can kind of fix things. God wants us fully, freely, consciously, wholly to share in the divine life. And the great responsibility, the awesome truth of that is what Dante is being invited to perceive now. And it is difficult to understand because Dante has another question, which Beatrice divines, because it's clear that some people do make vows and then they're released from those vows, and actually their lives get better from being released from those vows. So Dante's being invited to discern what's going on the inside of making vows, of aligning your life with the divine. He's been invited to move on from that younger child self that wants to be told what's right and wrong, to being able to actually find a pathway through life that can discern what is right or wrong, that is as much reflexive and in the moment as it is written down eternally as if for all time. And Beatrice says, this kind of deeper wisdom, this deeper truth of the space of the moon, this liminal zone, where Dante is trying to understand light and darkness, shade, the different phases of life, all these qualities that are captured in the physical moon. Dante's got to try and understand that now, and Beatrice says it does take time to sort of absorb, to assimilate, to digest these things. So this canto is given to us to have some time to reflect on that more deeply. And what she says is that, think of it like this. When you make a vow, when you make a promise, when you choose to exercise this freedom of will, you do it in two ways, really. One is the actual thing that you decide to do, the vow that you decide to make. But one also is the very act of deciding, the very act of making the vow. And whilst the content of the vow can be changed, the act of doing so can't, because that's what this life is about. It is about making these choices and exercising these freedoms to become aligned. But what this means is there is a kind of freedom to make new decisions, to adjust your life, to be relinquished and break free of vows in order to realign, to take a decision that better utilizes this gift. But that comes about when we don't seek to be released from a vow just to kind of escape the burden of responsibility, because we can't decide what to do, because we just need to kind of hide from something, maybe to regress to that earlier state of mind when we get told what to do and not to do. Rather, a vow can be changed when it actually honours the business of commitments in life, aligning yourself with the divine, even more. And so a vow can be broken when a new vow is taken that deepens the purpose of this life, that deepens the gift. Beatrice is alluding to this difference she'd made in the previous canto between the conditional or personal will, the kind of mortal choices that you make, as opposed to this part of our divine double that is aligned with the divine will, the absolute nature of things. And so if you make a personal choice that's different, that can be thought of as changing the conditioned will so that it's actually better aligned with the absolute will within you. And of course, in a way, that would happen. That is also what this life's about. But she says when that happens, it's got to be like the Levitical injunction. She refers to the Levitical injunction in the Hebrew Bible, where the Jews were told that they could make a different sacrifice to the divine, as long as that sacrifice represented more of themselves that they were giving. And she says that this is also a bit like moving from the number 4 to the number 6. This rather nice numerical analogy, actually, because of course the number 6 includes the number 4, even though it's more than the number 4. And so, in a way, any change that you make in life must embrace the divine even more. It must, as it were, turn up the volume up to number 6 in order for it to be one that is still in alignment with this freedom, with this purpose that we conscious, intelligent creatures have. She also remembers what we had heard about at Peter's Gate, which is the silver and the gold key. This is an analogy for, you might say, the capability to make a decision, the silver key to unlock the door, but also the authority or the golden key to unlock the door. And I think at a personal level, this means the capability of understanding our motivations for wanting to make a change in life, for wanting to embark upon a new commitment. That, you might say, is the silver key. Those things which perhaps we're less conscious of, but have properly discerned. So we're stepping more towards life rather than stepping back away from life. But then the golden key also represents that more objective side of our understanding. It's not just, as it were, what we decide for ourselves, but how we measure that against others, different authorities, the kind of wider sense of life and its direction. Maybe by wrestling with a text like the Divine Comedy itself, it prompts us to rethink how our life is going ourselves. And the Divine Comedy in that case is like the golden key. It's kind of an objective reference point that we're using to try to understand things as well. The golden key may also be conferring with a guide or, say, a therapist, by which is meant not that a guide or therapist automatically knows what's right or wrong to do, but in conversation, in dialogue with them, what's right or wrong to do can be a way that it emerges. Beatrice does remark at this point too that some vows can't therefore be undone. Some vows, it becomes clear when you've checked with the silver key, checked with the golden key, that they are actually the right vows that you should be making, and so they are ones to stick with. And the implication is that Piccarda and Constance had broken vows that really they should have kept in life, and that's why they are shining with the light of the moon. But then she says we must also not make vows lightly or rashly. She says we mustn't make vows like Jephthah, a figure, again, from the Hebrew Bible, who said, if God gives me the victory, I'll sacrifice the first thing I set my eyes on after the battle, which turned out to be his daughter. That was, again, trying to kind of bargain with God in a rash, hideous vow. And she also says that we mustn't be like Agamemnon, a figure from Homer's Iliad, the king who said that he would sacrifice something beautiful if only the gods brought the winds that would carry him to Troy. And it turned out that the beautiful thing that he saw was his daughter, Iphigenia, and so he sacrificed her. Again, a kind of vow misused, rashly, ill-made. Beatrice says we mustn't think of vows as like some kind of automatic water that cleanses us. And we mustn't, in our vow making, be like feathers tossed about by the wind. If this feels confusing, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, what are you supposed to do? Well, I think that is the whole point in this moony state, because the discernment is all. To discern these things are right is, in fact, to be living more closely to the divine life. It is becoming more aligned. And Beatrice says to Dante, look, the wisdom you've been given, this Christian tradition you've been given, does contain this insight, but you have to work hard really to see it. You have to do the digesting, and you must in particular resist from either becoming too literal or too legalistic, because that is to regress, not progress more fully into divine life. Dante, the poet, then tells us that as he has written, so Beatrice spoke. And it's another one of these moments where he indirectly addresses us to stress the significance really of what's been said, that unless we have got what has been described here, we won't be moving with them further into paradise. It's one of those moments, I think, where he's remembering the warning at the beginning of the paradise to make sure that we follow closely behind in our own sight so that we don't get lost and dazzled ourselves in the divine light. But the indication is that Dante the Pilgrim has got it. He has got the nuance. He has realized that it's by searching deep inside himself and making sure that what's inside himself is aligned with that which is most deeply present in the cosmos around the divine, that he can make these decisions. And in that moment, Beatrice looks up, so she looks from her inner sight towards the divine light herself, and Dante says, a bit like an arrow that hits the target even before the bow has stopped vibrating, they were suddenly in a new sphere of heaven. This new sphere is not actually named here in this canto, but it's the sphere of Mercury. And the suddenness of this transition, I think, indicates that it's precisely when we grasp these truths, when we get these insights, we rise in wisdom, in light, and become closer and closer towards the divine life. That's what it means to have moved now from the sphere of the moon into the new sphere, the new dimension of reality, the new capacity to see things, which is the sphere of Mercury. And immediately, the way that Dante, the poet, describes this shift starts to reflect the Mercurial character of this new sense of things. For one thing, Mercury shines more brightly with Beatrice's arrival. And I think that's a bit like the pools of Mercury, the quicksilver, when the little balls of Mercury join up to form a larger ball, and so the silvery surface reflects that little bit more. That's a bit like what Beatrice's arrival in the sphere of Mercury is like. We're also reminded that what Dante's talking about here is not the literal planet Mercury, rather it's the way that the planet Mercury in the sky reflects itself these mercurial qualities. And so Beatrice now is the fuller embodiment. Her soul is reflecting this state of mind. So of course the planet shines more brightly than it would do just by its own light. Dante turns to us again and says, look, imagine what this was like for me, reader, having been wrestling with these things, been in this liminal space of the moon, suddenly catching sight of this deeper wisdom because of Beatrice's discourse, and finding myself now in this mercurial state. It's a mercurial way of putting it. It's almost like a tease to us. Can we imagine? Can we follow him? He's tempting us to follow him, if almost as if we dare. He's in this kind of this jokey as well as this more advanced state of mind. The souls too rush out to greet these new arrivals, like as much Mercury as much Quicksilver joining together, increasing the volume, the light, the love. And Dante says to us in another tease, imagine what it would be like if I stopped now. And Dante tells us that he wants to know more about these souls. He longs to understand how where they are, a bit like the souls that he's met in the moon, why they're in the sphere of the moon. But now, not just because he's puzzled, I think he's got some sense of how different souls reflect the divine light in different ways, but because he wants to understand what it is to reflect the divine light in this mercurial way. He sees that one soul in particular who's spoken to him is nestled as if in its own light. He's beginning to see, before he fully understands what the nature of these particular souls in paradise is about. They're nestled in their own light. He also sees the eyes of this soul, and this is quite interesting because it's the last time he sees the human features in the souls that he meets. And so there's something about the human individual's own light, its own features, its own distinctiveness, which is still shining here in this sphere of Mercury. This slight competition between the lights that are shining, is it the human individuals or is it the divine lights? is underlined again, because Dante also says how the light of Mercury um, in the heavenly sphere is a bit like the light of Mercury, the planet, which is easily lost against the background of the sun. You know, Mercury is the planet closest to the sun, and so it's actually quite hard to see in physical life because it often gets eclipsed by the light of the sun. And so we're being invited to consider, you know, what is it about this soul nestling in its own light that somehow might get eclipsed by a brighter light, by the sun, a more divine light. Dante also describes this soul shining a bit like the sun itself shines, but when it is rising and the light comes to us through a kind of mist. So we don't actually see the sun directly, which we can't actually do. But what we do see is a kind of echo reflection of the sun's light in a golden ball that's formed in the mist. And so this soul that he sees is a bit like the golden ball in the mist as well. So shining with a beautiful, glorious light, but a little bit compromised because it's but a kind of reflection of the sun's light. So we're getting the sense that this mercurial state is glorious and wonderful in its own way, but it too, a bit like the moon, isn't the full-on, well, light of the sun, but by implication, the full-on divine light that Dante isn't capable of seeing yet, and so hence is encountering these souls that reflect the light in that slightly lesser way. Dante, the poet, has previously told us in the Convivio, one of his earlier works, that the mercurial state of mind is the state of mind that engages in dialectic. It's different from the moon, which was more liminal, on the edge of things. Dialectic is much more about making your statements, making your claims, putting forward what you understand, hearing what comes back from another, and in the to and fro of that, realizing a third thing. And that's how the transcendence of dialectic, works. And so I think in this mercurial state, we're beginning to get a hint of this as well. It can be both a guide, a bit like the first statement you make in a dialectic, but needs to lead to a second step where you get confused by what comes back next in order that you can rise further. And so similarly to the light that he's seeing in this soul is a true light, but he must also be a bit careful that he doesn't get confused with the greater light that it's possible for him to see as well. This is the trickster-ish nature of the mercurial state of mind. It's going to be one that is explored in the next couple of cantos. But for now, Dante ends this canto in much the same way that he had actually done at the beginning, by saying the following canto, referring directly to the next canto as he referred directly to this, the fifth canto, will keep us enwrapped, much as this soul is enwrapped in a mix of its own light that also is something of the divine light. And it's a nice teasing little way which invites us to keep open, keep a bit annoyed maybe, but also enticed, wanting to know more, which will come in Canto 6.